My name is Shelly Pitts. I'm a student in the Management 9390 class. And today, as a part of the assignment, we'll be talking about the consumer industry and assortment optimization. Just to give a little introduction, so I chose to discuss the consumer industry, specifically assortment optimization, because ultimately, when I looked at all the different industries and our other option, the consumer industry impacts everybody. It doesn't matter your economic class, your social class. Everyone is a consumer to some capacity, and I found that fascinating. It's also very clear that within the consumer industry, there is a very large possibility to use data. These organizations are bringing in data at almost an alarming amount, so there's so much opportunity there. If I look at the industry overview here, so I found through my research that that the consumer industry is a leading adopter of AI. That goes back to Tesco. That goes back to Kroger partnering with 8451. Specifically, Tesco back in 1995 had a consumer loyalty program where they were bringing in a lot of data from their consumers, and they were able to utilize that in different ways. Obviously, back in 1995 compared to now, things have changed greatly, but that just shows that even in 1995, to some capacity, there was potential there to use AI, to use data analytics to the advantage of the company. And again, when we look at Kroger and 8451, we know that they were very AI driven. We know that that was one of their main strategies. They actually have that Restock and Kroger initiative, and within that, they had a very specific goal to use AI for assortment optimization. And again, they were very AI driven. They used tools and software such as AutoML to take advantage of this. And when I did my research, I thought it was very important to consider the global considerations of using AI and data analytics. We look here at Kroger and Tesco here in the United States, but when we look across the country, when we look internationally, I think that that differs. Specifically, I found an article by Basu et al. 2022 that explained how India just recently, within the past few years, started using AI. And Basu specifically explained how India has 7,900 towns, they have 600,000 villages, and 10 million retailers. And when he thinks back to 3 years ago when they weren't using it, it's almost impossible to think that they would be able to succeed, thrive, and grow economically without using artificial intelligence. It's almost impossible to just use human intelligence. They did find in India recently that they have some limitations, and that included being able to interpret, being able to actually use and implement the data, what to do with the data, how to make the data helpful for these organizations. So I thought that was very interesting to consider as well. Again, to add to the industry overview, AI, I think initially was brought into this industry to make it easier for the organizations to cut time that humans had to be taking on certain projects, almost to take place of humans. I think that was the initial idea. It's cutting cost. It's going to cut many attributes of the business. But I think when we look at when artificial intelligence came in and where it's going, now we know that it's a partnership between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. We need that human aspect, and we learned about that in our readings with Davenport and Mittal. It's very important to have that human aspect in order to interpret the data, and I think that that's critical going forward. First research specifically predicts trends including RFID, and RFID is a system that can predict, that's very helpful in the supply chain infrastructure. It can predict outstocks, it can predict what to put on shelves, when to take things off of shelves, when something is sold out, when something is low on stock, when to replenish it, things like that. So defining the use case for this assignment, what is our business problem? So for me, looking at this industry, looking at the consumer industry and assortment optimization, the business problem was preventing outstocks, but not just that. Preventing outstocks and the ability to use big data and all that data coming in to prevent the outstocks. And I think Kroger and Tesco are a great example of how they're bringing in so much data and there's so much opportunity there. It has to be utilized correctly. And if it's not utilized correctly, you're doing your organization almost a disservice. If you're not AI driven and you're not using that data to propel you within your industry, you're going to be at a disadvantage. So my solutions, I had 3 solutions to this problem. The first is simple. Culture. We learned about that in our Davenport and Mittal reading. Culture is huge. You have to have an AI-driven culture. This starts with the leaders. We're talking about the CEOs, the executives. They have to have a background in technology and statistics, and you have to have buy-in from them. If you don't have buy-in from the top, you're not going to get buy-in going down to the bottom. This is so important because the leaders and the managers are going to have to upskill staff and educate staff on the importance of AI. And if you're bringing in new systems, there's going to need to be education on that as well. You have to be able to fully embrace it. And to do that, you need that supportive culture. Also, my second solution was technology. We have a culture. We're bought in. Now you need the technology. You need that software. You need AutoML. You need the RF for supply chain management. Those are things that you have to look at. You have to look at the benefits for those and decide what works for your organization. And I think that's also where it comes that it's very important that your executives are very technology focused, because with AI, a big part of this, almost a very strong part of it, is technology, and there has to be some knowledge there. And lastly, the economy, economics. This is expensive. These systems, the buy-in for this, creating a culture, picking out the system that works for you, it is expensive. And it's also important to look at the economy. Where are these systems going? Is the RF good to buy into? Is this a good investment? Is AutoML a good investment? Where is this going? Are we projecting that this is going to be a technology that outlasts the others? So I think those are all important considerations to take into consideration. So my 3 solutions: culture, technology, and economics. Next, we'll talk a little bit about the ethics and law. This is so important. Anytime you're talking about AI, ethics and law are very important. I found a study by Kim et al. That talked about how when there is not a human on the other side of what you're doing, the human that is involved is at a massively increased risk of unethical behavior. If they know someone's not on the other side, if there's not an actual human, they're at an increased risk to do something that they maybe shouldn't do. There's also regulatory implications. Chatterjee, in a study by Chatterjee, she talked about the implications of, not being in tune with government regulations, not considering the ramifications of, the regulations that are in place for robots, for systems that take the place of a human. So I think those are 2 important things to consider with AI. Next, when we look at the future, so AI, I think, is all about the future. It is very clear that the consumer industry is growing. We all consume to some capacity, and I think the threshold to which it progresses is almost dependent on AI and dependent on the company's ability to utilize that AI. When we're looking here, so this is a graph by First Research of the consumer industry and the retail market. Their industry forecast is pretty strong. We see a spike here in 2022 and a pretty steady increase after that. And I think if organizations, companies, if the industry really takes advantage of AI, I think there's a capacity for it to even, grow beyond what we're seeing here for projections. So, a conclusion and personal reflection. I really enjoyed this project. I found it fascinating to learn about the consumer industry and assortment optimization, the different systems that come into play. We know the consumer industry impacts everybody to some capacity, and focusing on AI-driven culture, focusing on the systems that are going to work for that organization to prevent issues like stock out and to put the correct things on the shelves at the right time are extremely important. I found it fascinating when I reflect back on this to think about real life scenarios like COVID-19, where organizations and companies were having certain goods fly off the shelves, but those companies were great at getting them back on the shelves in some cases. And I think right there we see the power of AI, the power of data analytics, and the power of having those systems in place. So I think it was just interesting to kind of connect. I didn't know much about the RFID and AutoML, but to learn more about those and connect them to real life situations like COVID-19, even to think about holidays where people are buying certain things and it's flying off the shelves. Yet the companies are able to keep the things on the shelves for us consumers who need them. Yeah, I really enjoyed this project, and thank you very much.